following is my conversation with Simon Summerscales. Simon is the VP of Marketing at Canyon Bicycles. Before joining Canyon in 2018, Simon was the head of communication strategy at the prestigious Wieden+Kennedy agency in London and director of communication strategy at 72andSunny in Amsterdam. During his tenure in the agency realm, Simon was responsible for creating numerous global campaigns for both Nike and Adidas. Simon is among the most experienced and accomplished marketing professionals in the cycling industry today. Simon Summerscales, thank you for coming on the show today.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So excited to talk about the biggest online bicycle brand in the world, a D2C bicycle brand. Get to talk a little bit about you, your background, talk about your 100-person team, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And then we'll dive into lots of interesting things about you and about Canyon. So yeah, like we said, maybe we can just get started talking about who you are, where you're from, and start from there.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want me to just start off, give you the background? Sure. Not too much detail, maybe. I think my name gives away my origin somewhat. I don't think it's a more English name than Summerscales, but I'm from the UK. I was born and raised in the beautiful small city of Brighton on the southeast coast, so wedged between, if you don't know the UK too well, wedged between the kind of sea and countryside in the southeast of England. Still very much in my heart, but I moved away a long, long time ago. But yeah, real outdoorsy, very normal upbringing, but outdoorsy, a lot of swimming in the sea, a lot of camping, scouts, big part of my life as a young kid and as a teenager, and something we'll talk about a lot, but an obsession with bikes that started with the first bike and never stopped really, through different phases of road bikes and mountain bikes, and now I'm talking to you from Amsterdam where I'm based, an almost equal obsession with urban bikes as well, so every kind of two wheels. Awesome.
So you grew up in Brighton. Did you go to school in the UK as well?
Yeah. I did everything. All my studies were there, and then I moved to London after studies, actually, 21, and began a career, which has been most of my career actually, in advertising at 21 years old. So straight from university to London.
What did you study?
Communication studies. So. It's always been in the same kind of field and same area, basically. Yeah.
And how did that come as you were younger? How did that sort of because people that get into marketing, I know I started in tech, and then I sort of fell into marketing just because I was really always drawn to messaging, always drawn to communication. How did you say you became aware that was the career you wanted to follow?
It really did develop over time, but if I'm really very honest, I looked at the opportunities in front of me. Journalism was something I was interested in because it was the creativity and the writing, and obviously particularly investigative journalism, that sounded fun and exciting. But if I'm really honest, you looked at the career opportunities, and advertising at that point looked like a place where I could earn really good money, and it was a creative environment, particularly in the UK. I remember actually David Ogilvy's book that was sure. Kind of a real opener for me into that world. Yeah.
And the UK has always sort of been, can we say, authoritative with regards to communication across the European continent?
Yeah, definitely. In an advertising sense, it was a genuinely creative industry in the UK. I've lived in France a little bit. My wife is French.
It was. You're saying it's not anymore.
Well, I've been out of it for a long sure. while now. I left the UK in 2008, and we'll come to that later. But yeah, I haven't been in the UK industry for a long time. But when I joined it, I'm really talking about when I joined it, was for me, sure. It felt incredibly creative. The work was really interesting. The advertising at that time, this kind of Saatchi and Saatchi kind of British Airways advertising, which was popular. And then, of course, seeing what was happening in the US with Apple's advertising. Was exciting to me, and of course we'll come to my career at Wieden+Kennedy, but Nike as well. And the UK seemed to share a similar spirit to the US in that sense of, it was a creative industry, a genuinely creative industry. And in truth, also, it was an opportunity where I felt I could, have a really strong career and, earn a good salary.
So did you find yourself like you got into the advertising business, and we'll get into, then I think you went into Nike and Adidas later, but at the beginning, what was your impression? And like, it sounds like you were first in advertising and then you went into on the brand side. Can you tell us about that journey a little bit?
I'm really late to that. I'm 52 years old, right? Most of my career, 25 years of my career was in advertising. So I was, that was going to be my career.
Agency.
Yeah. Agency that whole time, right? So,
big agency, small agency?
Bigger to smaller, and I think, for me, the most important part of that career was with Wieden+Kennedy, which is Nike's advertising agency. It was a target for me from the day I got into advertising. Seemed the most creative agency. Widen's is not the biggest agency by any stretch of the imagination. They only have a few offices around the world, but they really outgunned the rest of the market in terms of the quality of the creative, and the culture of the place was really, really different. But before I got to that, there were bigger. I worked for a media agency originally, so I was kind of on the media side of things to start with, because that was an easy entry point, to be honest with you, and then moved to the creative agency side after about 7 or 8 years, because I wanted to be in a more creative environment. The highlight, as I say, was getting towards Wieden+Kennedy, because it felt like the place where I was going to feel most at home, I think.
And did it?
Yeah. There's two parts to my career, and I mean this really sincerely. The time that I had at Widen's and the time that I'm enjoying now at Kenyon, these are the two parts I know for sure. At whatever point in the future I finish my career, these will be two of the pinnacle parts of my career.
Well, can you say that careers, at least not careers overall, but tenures at employers, they have they sort of have a life cycle, has been my experience. You get in, whether it's 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, but there is a life cycle where you kind of see everything you're going to see. You grow about as much as you're going to grow, or at least the majority of it, the diminishing returns sort of say it's time to maybe move on. Have you had that experience too?
Yeah, and I think it also depends on the stage of the agency or the business you're in, right? When I joined Wieden+Kennedy, it was a small operation in the UK. Widen's had an office, obviously, in Portland. That's the mothership for them, next to Nike's HQ. They had an office here in Amsterdam, where I am now, and the UK office was certainly the third of the three, right, in terms of size and scale. So I joined it at a point that it was trying to grow. It was only 20 people, 25 people, I think, when I joined, and we were up to about 250 when I left. So I also went through an experience with Widen's London where it was all about development and growth and building a team, and that also felt part of the journey for me. So I think even with advertising, it goes in cycles, right? It's difficult to be continuously successful. There's ups and downs, and Widen's, for sure, like any other agency, went through many ups and downs. So I enjoyed a really nice up period there, and by the time I left, it actually was a good time for me in exactly the way you've said, which I felt I'd learned everything I wanted to learn there, but it also was a point where I didn't feel the place had much further to go at that moment. So I think I timed it pretty well. And it's funny, we'll talk about Kenyon, but I don't think Kenyon's on that kind of speed of growth in terms of ad agencies grow really fast and then shrink really fast, right? I don't think the business environment or the kind of type of business that Kenyon is grows at that kind of rate, and certainly doesn't decline at that rate. So it's a little different. But I do feel that I'm joining Kenyon on in a period where it's really developing. And I get a lot from that, I have to say. And maybe that's part of the reason why the experience of Widen's and the experience of Kenyon feel like the best for me.
Wow. I really want to dive into your experience at Wieden+Kennedy, but we can't do that right now. So we have to move on. So after Wieden+Kennedy, you went to Nike?
No. I was working on Nike at Widen's,
okay.
right? So I never.
And then Adidas? Adidas as well.
So that was 72 and Sunny. So I moved. I moved for personal reasons to France with my wife, and then I continued working for Wieden in London, but also in Amsterdam. And actually, we decided to move to Amsterdam in 2013, and I moved to work for 72 and Sunny, which is kind of an offshoot of Wieden, really, a bunch of folk that were at Wieden before. And I ended up, it's obviously the conversation we're having, it was just interesting that I'd gone from working with Nike and then 72 and Sunny, it was working with Adidas. But my career was, I was working with a lot of other brands, right? It wasn't just these brands, but I always enjoyed being around that kind of sports culture, and particularly Nike, I think, because of the performance culture of Nike.
Okay,
it was fun.
So since we can't dive into the Nike and the Adidas too deeply, but you did have a deep advertising experience. Now, can you tell us, quickly, kind of in those years, you were doing, what types of activations were you doing? Was it mostly creative? Was it more operations? Did you have a team, or did you sort of move around and see a lot of different aspects of the agency? I'm just trying to zero in on what we can say you maybe learned in those years that you felt like that have brought you forward professionally.
Yeah, and it's probably not to direct your question away, but it's probably helpful to talk about the culture of Wieden a little bit, because it did have a big impact on how I learned and what I learned, and also how that's connected to Nike. But in terms of the specific answer to your question, I was always on a strategic role. So I was Wieden head of communication strategy at Wieden, which meant I was involved in communication planning, strategic planning for the brands.
Of the company or of the clients?
No, for the clients. Right, so in any client that you're working on, you're working on the development of the creative work with the creative teams. Sure. That's on brief so far as the client's strategy is concerned. And then obviously looking, it was a transformational period in terms of the media landscape, right? So a lot of it also was looking at obviously the development of digital and the move towards digital and
digital. We can call it transformation. Yeah. In cycling, you haven't worked for smaller brands, but in the smaller brands, they arrive so late. In my experience, I've been in this business for a while, and it's just kind of they just arrive very late in cycling because it's a niche business. Yeah, there aren't a lot of trailblazers in that sense. Maybe we can talk a little bit later, but it's like I'm looking at TikTok, and it is destroying everything in its path, and no one's using it in the cycling business. It's just insane. Yeah, no, it's true. And the speed of change it just becomes more rapid all the time, right? That was the thing, is I was in a period in advertising where when I started in advertising, it was still about TV advertising, and to some extent when I left, it was still the case, it was still the bit that people spent a lot of time and energy on. And maybe even to this day, the Super Bowl spot is still a big thing, right? Particularly in the US. But obviously, but that's not where the attention is.
Exactly, and the audience moved, and also the format and form of creativity has shifted massively, right? Something that I'm sure we're going to come on to, but talking about how the means of production, how it works in terms of production, the opportunity has really shifted, the speed of production, the volume of creation, the volume of output, but then also the costs associated.
The frequency of output, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not picking on cycling. No. Everybody has, everybody moves slowly because once you do have kind of an ingrained strategy, the train is moving. It's hard to kind of slow it down.
That's right.
But I saw that in social media because I kind of came up when social media had just kind of was really starting to take off, and it, like in 2013 and 14, like not many Instagram accounts looked good, right? Like not many. There were specific influencers that were doing it really well, but now all the Instagram accounts look good. Yeah. It's wild kind of how that came about, but
yeah, but as we said already, the speed of that change, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this a lot, but that's where it's a cultural issue, right? Which is how rapidly you change, how willing you are to change, and how you can be comfortable with continuous change, right? And it's one of the reasons why I've ended up in a direct-to-customer business, because it felt like culturally that was the right place to be, in an environment where you have a certain comfort with change. knowing that the things of today will not necessarily be the things of tomorrow. The opportunities of today are not necessarily the opportunities of tomorrow. Certainly, so far as the communication platform is concerned, how, in this particular role that I do, how you tell the stories, right? How you communicate with the brand, it's shifting constantly.
So tell me about the culture you had said, because you mentioned it a few times about the culture of the agency where you work. Can you tell me just a little bit about that and kind of your insights about culture in your teams and in the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, that experience of Wieden+Kennedy, and I know if you talk to anyone that worked in that environment, I think they would say the same. It was pretty unique. It was a privately held company, right, and still is to this day.
Family owned.
And Dan Wieden was always in charge. He passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. But he created and defined that culture, and it's a theme we're going to come back to in terms of founder-driven businesses. But it made a big difference because it meant we weren't always chasing the dollar. We were able to make decisions that were good for the company and long-term for the company, and it didn't.
So we weren't important.
At the behest. We weren't at the behest of shareholders.
It's so important. I mean, look what's happening. Look what happened to Wiggle.
Yeah.
Look what's happening to a lot
Cigna.
With Cigna. It's like it's leverage. It's all leverage.
Yeah, and it's really heartbreaking to hear the story, because the people, with the Cigna, I think we've all been looking at the news and hearing from the people working there. People were doing a great job, and
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. I don't do it, because that's an innovative space in a growth industry, and it's more of a leverage game there, and where investments come in and private equity, or not private equity, but there was a SPAC involved.
Yeah.
So an IPO, but anyway, that's a whole.
Another thing. But the point with Wieden was it was a long term. Yeah.
Culture is defined by the leader, right? Culture is defined by the leader. It sounds like the owner had a very defined. Can you tell me maybe 2 or 3 of the values that you took away from that?
It was he loved this concept of chaos in the organisation, and I think the concept. Weiden's was obviously has a reputation, always has had a great reputation for good creativity, right? And the premise for that was that to make creativity, to be creative, you have to constantly live in this kind of culture of chaos, right? You have to look at trying to do things differently all the time. And so it was this, the concept of embracing failure was really important to the business. We had this thing about walking stupid every day. It was reinvent yourself every time. Don't be afraid to fail. And that creates a form of chaos, right? Nothing necessarily runs to time. I think Wieden as an agency was infuriating to its clients for not always being on time, maybe getting really expensive because ideas would go crazy. But it fostered a brilliant creativity of innovation, of difference, and of comfort with difference as well. And so these were the kind of principles, values that it lived by as a company, and it put culture first. It really did. And if that was negative, it was like, are you a Weiden's type person? This was the thing that when it would maybe go a little sour, but generally a really inclusive environment, and as I say, pushing people to take some risks.
So to create effective and innovative communication, there needs to be a certain amount of chaos.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a brilliant book that was, and by the way, this growth was Weiden's was started in 1982, and so really was born, alongside the growth and development of Nike, right? Weiden's don't take the credit for the success of Nike, but Weiden's learned everything from Nike, and obviously another founder-driven business. There was this great book in the agency, which was Phil Knight Hates Advertising, and it was really just about this idea about how do you do it in a way that makes it not advertising? Because I think we all understand the same point. When it's advertising, it's wrong, right?
Wow. It can't be advertising. You have to not make advertising. You have to working in advertising to do it well. You have to not make
advertising. Exactly. Yeah.
That's so true, though. The things that I've seen that work, it has to feel like it's just a little story.
Yeah. And it was full of these brilliant little stories about that, but it just tried to foster constantly this culture of like, look again at yourself and your work. And that really lives with me as well. It's like, is it the best work of your life? Are you doing the best work of your life? And if you hold yourself to that standard, then it's, you bring other people with you, you're always looking and trying to do the same thing. And That's the culture that I feel part of at Canyon, actually, on a product level, and what I'm trying to foster with the team that I lead as well. There's a similar culture. Are we doing the best work of our lives,
Okay, but Simon, I'm sorry, I have to ask, how can chaos and profits and organization and revenue, how do those exist together?
Yeah, but I mean, Wieden+, as I say, is a private company, right? So it's able to deal sometimes with the more turbulent times, but it's maybe not the same analogy, but the companies that inspire me, much like anyone else, right? Patagonia is a company that's always made decisions that seem counter to commercial success, right? When they introduced organic cotton, it could have bankrupted their company, but the reality is every time they made a decision for the good, for their own culture and for the good of the planet in their case, it's worked out commercially successful. And I think that's the point with Wieden+. I don't think it's perfect in any stretch, and maybe it just makes me think one of the account managers there, right? An account manager role is about organisation, delivery for the client, reliability. Sure. This guy was like, this always feels like an art project, or like a sort of art school kind of team. It's like we're not serious in some respects, and that is true. That might be the negative around that kind of chaos, but the quality of the work always, work always came first.
In this type of business.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting Canyon should live on a culture of chaos. That's not our culture.
No, but you're just talking about advertising. We're talking about creating messaging and communication that resonates with people and that brings, that impacts people in a way. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a, we do work for businesses, and we do have to bring messages to the public in an effective and cost-effective way. Yeah. And the more, we'll say, innovative, impactful the message is, it can actually exponentially increase the value of the work that you're doing. So that's kind of probably how everything's balanced out in the end.
Yeah, that's right. And just remember, I mean, it's essentially a creative business, right? And what you're trying to do is find a way to build a relationship with the audience. And what Wieden+Kennedy, then this is the kind of work they make, right? They want to build provocative relationships with their between the sort of brands and their customers, meaning that it's a little bit more engaging, it's a little bit more alive, and there's definitely a kind of thoughtfulness to everything they're doing. And I think for that, you've got to really each time reinvent what you're doing. I think their work speaks for itself.
So I guess we can dive in. I want to dive into Canyon here a minute, but I guess I want to ask you, in my experience in cycling, and probably in business in general, in terms of communication, like there's a way to kind of do the job. I don't want to say phone it in, but you can phone it in much of the time and get the job done. Take the pictures, take the, get the social media posts out, write the captions. I feel like there is a seduction to do that because of just the priorities that everyone has. And what you're talking about is something very different. And I guess I'm talking to you, and you're in a huge organization with a lot of resources. And then maybe I talk with other entrepreneurs that have maybe not quite the budget. I guess, can you talk about I just want to give people who are listening here who are just like, man, we're doing the photo shoots, but it's like we don't have the time and we don't have the resources to do the sort of stuff that you're doing. What would you say to someone that's working in the industry that wants to do good work but just doesn't always have the resources to do that?
I would make the point that I think I had to make similar choices, and that's the point I would make, which is that you have to make choices and priorities.
Priorities.
Right?
That you're doing something well.
Exactly. And we don't do everything well by any stretch. I'd love it if we could, but I don't want anyone to walk away from this and see our work and think, God, they've nailed it. I think that I'm suggesting we've nailed it on everything. We're definitely not. We're way off that, and there's a lot of things that we have to prioritize over others. And so there's many things that I'll get to the end of every year, or the team gets to the end of the year, and we're like, it would have been nice if we could have done this better or that better, or, and when you say dialing in, I don't think anyone's dialing in, because this is way too much of a passion business. But maybe you're compromised is the point you're making. Maybe occasionally we're really compromised. Yeah. And we're equally compromised, maybe at a different level for certain things, but I would say that we have to deal with the same thing. So how do you overcome that? You focus on, when you really want to knock it out of the park, you focus on the big one. You put what your resources you can into the big one to deliver on it, you know.
So as long as something is getting enough attention, because probably maybe what I do see is everything gets kind of just pulled down, where maybe you do have to focus on one or two things and say, look, we're going to do one or two of these things we're going to do well. At least at the end of the day, we know that we did this or this well, and we're going to make sure that the ownership knows that. But that, because it just, cycling I mean, Canyon's one of the biggest brands in cycling, and it's not that big of a company. It's really not in the grand scheme of things. So cycling companies are very small and they have very limited resources. I guess that's what I'm saying is, you know, in this industry. Okay. Yeah, so no, what I was saying was so Canyon's a really big company in the grand scheme of things in terms of cycling, but in the world, it's actually a pretty small company.
Yep.
And so I guess just what I wanted to say is cycling has a particular characteristic that it has to communicate globally with resources of a small business.
Yeah.
And I feel for the people that work in, the people that work in this industry, because you have to do a lot of things. And I think probably maybe we can just take away from this is that you do have to make decisions, and you have to go to the ownership and say, look, there's a lot of things that we can do. We can do a lot of them okay, or we can do a few of them well.
Yeah.
And that has to be the decision of the entrepreneur, of the owner at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, I am an eternal optimist, I have to say, but my approach on all of that as well, and I know we'll talk a bit more about social media and stuff, but I think if you really, for me, it's a principle of focus on the really big stuff, right? So prioritize the big stuff. Then also focus on the things you can play with as well. You know, we talked about TikTok, and I know you and I have spoken before about TikTok briefly, but it's an interesting point about understanding a culture of constant transformation or of constant change. Save some energy and time and resources. Often it's small resources, right, to play with the stuff that's at the edge, right, the stuff that's transformative. For us right now, that's AI. That's also some of the channel stuff as well. And then manage that stuff in the middle. So focus on the priority stuff and the play stuff, and manage the stuff in the middle, because that's the thing where you need to reduce your efforts, really. Because that's some great strategic advice right there, because it's like you've got, and it probably comes from your experience, where it's like you do have to play because communication inherently is going to evolve. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's just being comfortable with the idea that it definitely will change. Things will change.
Sure.
So it's like, how do you prepare for change?
But humans naturally don't like change.
Definitely the bike industry as well, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's our place in the bike industry, and it's we'll come to my joining Canyon, but that's something that I align with a lot, culturally, personally, value-wise. I'm someone that's quite comfortable with change and a changing environment, and I think maybe that's something that Canyon has also benefited from, as a cultural value.
So speaking of change, you made a change to take the role at Canyon back in what year?
2018.
2018. Okay,
yeah.
So around 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. Tell us how that came about, and what you were thinking at the time, and maybe then we can go into like when did you realize what you had gotten into?
Yeah, I told you already, I always had this passion for bikes, and so if there was anything that was going to take me away from advertising, that was going to be it, right? And in particular at that point in my life, in my career, I have 3 kids. We were pretty comfortable in Amsterdam, at that point living in Amsterdam, and so it had to be anything that was going to move me out of that had to be about the thing I love most outside of my family. So it was about bikes, and the other part of that was this direct-to-customer bit, right? This opportunity in e-commerce.
Did you have an eye on that? Like you knew that was happening?
Yeah, very much. And I saw that company. So, I didn't know too much about Canyon. I read an article in Rouleur magazine some years before, where it just being a bit of a kind of under the bonnet of Canyon, and then there was some other stuff knocking around. And obviously then I started to see the brand through through the investment in sponsorship and performance side of things. So I was somewhat familiar with Canyon.
So you said you were familiar with Canyon. You'd kind of heard of it. It was on your radar. And then how did the opportunity come up?
I mean, honestly, it was not so exciting as a story. I had a contact from a headhunter who had actually worked with the agency that I was working for, 72 and Sunny, and it was one of those where it's like they're looking for a new head of marketing, new CMO. They were, they're looking for someone that's got a love of bikes, and obviously, I think someone in LA, the agency in LA, had sort of recommended me, put me forward for that role. So the contact came immediately, and it was hilarious because my wife, who is she's French actually, she was born in Germany, just by chance really, just didn't like the idea of going to Germany, so she let me go through the interview process, but always in the hope that we weren't going to, that I wouldn't get the job. But then it came about, and we moved to Germany for 3 years.
In Koblenz?
In Koblenz, yeah. So it was a tough one for my family because it was, a decision made just for me. This was really the opportunity for me. So I'm really grateful for them for that opportunity.
And you're going to be paying for that, or you eventually had to pay that back at some point, right? Or is that debt still on the books? That's still.
Yeah, I think I've got, as I said, 3 kids. The young boys are super happy because there's some cool vibes to Canyon at school, certainly around the Mathieu van der Poel or Fabio Wibmer thing. For my daughter, it only happened recently, which when Tyler, the creator, sort of took ownership of a Canyon. This was the first time my daughter accepted that Canyon might be cool. So yeah, I have some credibility as a result of Canyon's reputation rather than my own. But I'll pay for that forever. Yeah. And actually, when we moved to Germany, she loved it, and we had a really nice time. We moved back to Amsterdam. I'll talk a little bit later about the office that we have here, but we only moved back 2 years ago. But it was much more to do at that point, actually, with Canyon rather than with our personal situation. We were pretty happy there.
So what did you find when you took the role at Canyon? Right. What was happening there? Because I know in 2018 it was still privately owned by Roman.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, so what?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I did take, just to really underline why it was an opportunity I really was excited by. I think the D2C model, of course, was something where I felt it was, I could see the transformation of every other industry and the opportunity in that. So this was the value of this kind of view that you get in advertising, right? You have a contact and relationship with multiple industries and multiple kind of companies, and you start to see the shift, and it becomes a kind of clear trajectory across every industry, right? Transformation is coming to every industry if it hadn't happened already. And so that seemed appealing to me, but also, it was really about Roman and this founder-led business opportunity because, that was somewhat the story of Nike. I'd worked for other brands like Honda, which I found a fascinating brand working for Honda for years. Satoru Honda, the founder of Honda, was an incredibly strong cultural leader. Of course, the culture at Wieden+Kennedy as well. And I like this idea that, these founder-driven companies where they define a really specific culture. So a lot of the motivation for me going to Canyon was also to be and work with Roman, and also knowing the challenges of that. You're dealing with someone else's vision. And so, what was it like when I arrived? In the first place, I think from a marketing sense, it was challenging because we hadn't had anybody leading marketing for some time, for more than 6 months. And so the team, I think, were a little demoralised. It was a tough situation without the leadership that they deserved.
That's devastating for marketing teams. I've seen that in the past. Just because no one knows who gets to take the decision. Things don't move forward. You work on something and then it just kind of sits there. It's simmers and no one. Yeah, it's tough. But I guess I wanted to back up a second. So Roman, you were kind of intrigued by Roman. Was that just his story that he had built this thing on his own, or did you talk to him personally and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy, he's an interesting guy? Or how did that sort of come about, that interest?
Yeah, both. I mean, it definitely was after more, I would say, because the reality is as much as I'd read about Canyon, I didn't know so much about Canyon. And so it was after speaking to him, you really start to understand that. And I still think he's a really fascinating, inspirational human. I really do. I love hanging out with Roman. I have a mad passion for bikes, and I think if you have that, if you can communicate on that level to start with, you start on this incredible kind of level where, obviously we're talking a lot about the opportunity, and we're talking a lot about the things that we need to achieve in the business, but underlying it all the time is just this sort of passion for the same thing. So that was also really inspiring to get to know him, how he ticked, and also the history of the company and the decisions that he made, early decisions. And it's sort of continuous as well, because he's still very much involved in the business, right?
Sure.
And every time we do an interview, we've done kind of a number of sort of small documentaries or small films together. We've done events together. I feel like I learn something new every time. There's a little bit of the history and story that comes out, a little bit more about his motivation. So I still enjoy that a lot, I have to say.
So we talked about Wieden+Kennedy, and that there was the values of the culture were built around creating great creative, building great creative through chaos, through certain elements. What is Roman's kind of core values of his culture that you've seen?
Well, I don't want to, because it could get to be a long story, right? If I talk about the history of it, some of the motivation is about, as he will talk about, the personal situation with his dad, his relationship with his dad. So he's fired a lot by that personally. Professionally, I think, first of all, Roman loves winning, and he loves competition. This is a very similar cultural kind of value maybe to someone like Phil Knight, maybe very different levels maybe as companies, but with a similar kind of attitude to winning. So everything Roman's trying to achieve is to be successful, and that's why the start of the continuation of the kind of relationship with the performance side of the sport, it's something that will never leave Canyon. This is really fundamental to his DNA, because it's so, for him, so compelling, so addictive. This idea of taking part and competing and winning.
Competitive sports.
Yeah,
competitive sports.
Exactly. Yeah,
and it's through that the products are improved, developed.
Yeah, the evolution of the product, to do it very quickly, I think Canyon, he was initially a very successful bike dealer, right? Roman is a, bike shop guy at his heart. That's where he started.
Radsport Arnold.
Radsport Arnold, and he was a dealer for various bike brands, and very successful, the biggest in Germany at one point, prior to starting Canyon. But the frustration for him was that he knew more about the customer, he felt, he had a direct relationship with the customers that were coming into his store. He felt he could do a better job, or he felt that he was giving away maybe the thing that he understood and knew. So this was the origin of Canyon, and then the sort of development of engineering and the development of the bike was really this same passion for success. I think he built some bikes in the early days, or was developing bikes, let's say in the early days, that weren't at a level that he thought was was good enough, really. And so the pursuit of Michael Kaiser, who is still on our board, but became the sort of first CTO of Canyon, but he was the first engineer at Canyon as well. This was a real transformation for the business, right? Understanding of carbon fiber technology, finding the best carbon fiber in the world, and then building an engineering team at Canyon, to make the best product that you can make. And then racing became a big factor in terms of success and performance. So each step along the way is really about, how to win, really.
And so having this, it feels like it's a competitive, so it feels like at the core, at least the values that Roman bring are about excellence, about competitive excellence, probably bleeds into the product and everything else. Yeah. What when you came in and you started working with Roman, what did that mean in terms of then creating a message around that, which is at the level of what's happening, on the product side or on the professional side?
Yeah, I think, and maybe because you alluded to what was the culture like, right? I think first of all, Canyon has been growing prior to my arrival, at a pretty steady rate for some years, really, since the turn of sort of 2009, 2010, consistent growth each year, right? So this was a company also that had been, growing at a rate that it couldn't really keep up with, and that's a challenge for us as well, to keep kind of growing the team and developing the business in line with the sort of success of the business as well, right? So this is a big factor behind the thing. The thing about Roman is that he's somebody that loves marketing, right? So my relationship with him was from day one close. While he was still CEO, we met every week. And so marketing was dear to his heart as well. Marketing also because it's the narration of not just the Canyon story, it's the narration of his story, as part of that, when we talk about founder-driven business. So I think it was valuable for me to understand him and what drove him and what drove the company, the products that we make, and the more broad culture in the business. To be close to him, to kind of live that and learn it, I guess, in the early part of the role for me. So it was helpful to have that situation. And that's the point, often, we're marketing products in many cases. We want to talk about the features of the product and communicate the product successes to the customer, but we're always trying to communicate our culture within, right? And the values that we stand by, the values that are important to the business. Performance and innovation are really fundamental to Canyon.
Well, in my experience with cycling, it's been product. In some companies, and I don't know if this is true for Canyon, but in some companies, the product and the marketing are very close, right? They're very, very intertwined because the product is what drives the differentiation. It's what drives growth, and sometimes if there is an innovation happening. Other times it can be more PR driven. It can be more event driven. I don't know. What are your thoughts on how closely product and marketing have to, where that lies in your experience?
Very close, because it does define the brand as well, right? So, it's fundamental. And I think when we're most successful, we're really close to the development of a product, right? From its absolute inception, right? Even if it's a continuation of the same family, right? It's really important to understand the motivation of the engineers, what they're trying to achieve. And obviously have always, I think in terms of our role in the development of a product is to be the voice of the customer somewhat, or maybe if not the voice of the customer, to be the transition from the brand from the brand to the customer, right? So representing the customer in that discussion and relationship. But I think, as I say, when we're really successful, we get close to the engineers. We really understand what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve, and then how we translate that, how we communicate that narrative and that story in a way that's compelling for the customer.
And are you guys, when you said close to the customer, does that mean close like in communicating or also getting feedback?
Getting both. We'll come on to talk about data and the values of the company, but we're really interested in customer feedback. So, informally, how people talk about our product through social channels, how they give us comments, and the good, the bad, the ugly of that, and we take it all in. Sometimes it's hard to hear, but we take it all in. But we do a lot of research as well with our customers. We've got a really good insights team, I think, an incredible insights team, I think, who constantly are talking to customers to get feedback. I think we're really listening. We want to listen. We want to make our product better all the time.
Yeah, you have to. And maybe in other organizations that aren't D2C, that's probably coming from the dealers, or it's coming from product managers that literally have to go out and ride bikes with people. Obviously also for Canyon. But I guess at this point, can we dive into some technical aspects of, so the number one KPI for your organization, I assume, is bringing customers to the website and converting those customers, correct? To Canyon customers.
As a commercial, we have an ambition, right, which is to be the most inspirational, innovative bike brand in the world. And
I get that.
I don't want to sell to you, but but we have to be in business. Yeah.
Right, you have to pay the bills. So
exactly.
So if we step back, you don't have distributors, you don't have sales team. Okay, this is unique. So there's one metric. I think I saw a documentary about Canyon once where there was a board with Google Analytics up, and in one of the rooms, I don't know if it's still that way anymore, but those people that are coming into your store, it's like one gigantic store, right?
Yeah.
And you need to know what those people are coming in, where they're coming from, how long they're staying.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about, in this sense, how is marketing affecting this type of activity? Are you your job is to bring the right people, find the right people? How is your team working to get those people into the store?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to avoid going back to making it sound like the marketing speak, but inspiration. So my job, our role in marketing is broadly about communicating inspiration and innovation, right? And when you want to talk about it in terms of numbers, that's about how do we drive the traffic, meaningful traffic towards the website. But it just doesn't stop there, right? The point then of conversion is a big factor, which is how do you tell the story of the product on the site? How do you continue to imbue the brand experience? The other factor is that, and I think about this as a bike customer fan myself, which is that it doesn't stop at the point you purchase either, right? There's some delay before, in the case of Canyon, hopefully only 24, 48 hours before you get your bike, but there's some delay before you get the bike. There's more information that you want to suck in as well about the bike. So it's about a constant sort of customer journey as well. But for sure, primarily it's about how do we inspire people enough to come and visit our site, and bring them to the site. And then we obviously have a job to do to convince them that Canyon is the right choice from that point onwards. It's a bit of both, really. And
where does your team stop and the e-com team start, or is the e-com team under your?
No, the e-com team is separate, but we're fully entwined, right? I'm based in Amsterdam now. John Keeler, who runs the e-commerce team, is based in Koblenz. We used to share an office together, though, because we have to be entirely entwined. So they rely on us broadly for the materials that we deliver, the narrative around the bikes. And obviously their skill set is much more about how do we optimize the performance. And obviously their team also are providing us the data, the feedback to understand what works, what doesn't work,
So from a very simple standpoint, they'll give you a brief for a campaign. They'll say, we need X number of campaigns next year. You'll create around these products, and then you'll create the messaging, and then they'll broadcast it, get the feedback, and give you the feedback, and then you'll adjust. And how does that work? It's
the other way around, actually. We define the calendar, but we define the calendar based on the product, right? So we have a calendar, and this comes back to the point about prioritization, right? And this is something we're getting, I hope, better and better at every year. We start every year, or in fact way out front, right? We start by deciding what the priorities are for the year.
The hero products.
Product stories, exactly, the product stories that we want to tell. So the things obviously that make the biggest difference. And I'm not being glib to say it's not just about revenue. We're not just talking about bikes that generate revenue. We're also talking about the bikes that tell the best story for Canyon. We launched the Speedmax track bike this year. That is not a big revenue driver for Canyon, but it's really important to the narrative around that bike, around innovation for the brand. So we define.
But how do you measure that?
Priorities.
How do you measure that, Simon?
Ultimately, I mean, it takes time to measure the impact of a brand impact, right? So I wouldn't say that that's an immediate commercial success, no. But in terms of long-term impact on the brand, we track brand metrics around likability, around innovation as well, and how innovative the brand is seen. So we're tracking on an ongoing basis the perceptions of the brand, right? So we can measure that over a long period of time. But you're right, that's not an immediate conversion metric on something like that.
It's more of an art in a sense.
Yeah,
in the short term.
And that's a good way to put it. I think we want to always balance the art and the science, right? Because we do, it's fundamentally, and this comes back to Roman, Roman wanted to be in the bike industry. He loves bikes, and so we're not about just commercial impact. It's also what impact the brand makes in the world of cycling. We want to be a part of that industry, and we want to be a proud player in that industry. So it matters to us how we're perceived and the quality of the products and how the products are perceived. So, the art matters as much as the science, for sure.
So you said you begin with a series of hero products that you can focus on based on the calendar. And once the calendar is defined, the product team, sometimes they're new products, innovations. So the product team will give you that list, and then you guys begin building the campaigns around them. Is that how that works?
That's right, but I mean, we're talking years out, right? So I can talk about, I could theoretically talk about 25, 26 comfortably
right
now in terms
You're talking about that right now?
Yeah.
Wow.
So we're obviously, the primary focus for us is 24 in the sense that it's around the corner.
You'll
the plan for
execute it.
24 is really now about how we build the plan for the year exactly. How do we define our budgets? 25, 26 is much more about organising the business. But yeah, we know the product life cycle. We know the kind of development plan for the next few years. And I don't think we're unique in that sense. I think that's the same for the other bike companies as well.
And so once you get the campaign, when does the feedback come, in a sense that I think of it this way, is you put a campaign out in the world in a direct-to-consumer environment, you're able to see if people are reacting to it positively or negatively.
Immediately.
When that happens, how do you guys, can you just tell me a little bit about how that whole process works? Is it the e-com team that says, look, people are putting these in their cart, or people are clicking on these ads, or people are doing A, B, and C? How does that work, and then how does that influence your work?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is it's not just e-com, right? So we're looking also, we value the bike media as well and the impressions of the bike media. So this is a big part of how we do things. So how our products review is important for us. The impact of that across social channels, of course, and the impact on the customers, right? So we're looking at multiple metrics around a launch. We're looking at success across various different areas. And of course, any given campaign, one is not the same as the other, right? The launch of an air road is a very different audience, a very different impact in terms of what our expectations are, in terms of direct sales. Sometimes some categories, some bikes are slow burners. There's something where the audience maybe isn't quite as impulsive as others. It's maybe not a big secret to say, a kind of high-end road bike, these are very, generally speaking, affluent customers, right? They tend to have disposable income, so they respond a lot faster than somebody maybe in a kind of more value end of the product chain. So we're not always looking for immediate sales performance on anything that we're doing. But yeah, for sure, we get that feedback straight away and we can adjust things accordingly. I don't think we're that reactive. We're not looking to change campaigns on the fly so much as learning for the next one, right? I think in each case we're sort of,
So what would a not postmortem, that's a bad word, after the kind of a review of the campaign, how does that look? So you'll take PR, who posted this, what did they say about it? Campaign performance, sales performance.
Yeah, we've got, so paid performance, and then you've obviously got organic performance in from an SEO point of view, but also from a social media point of view as well. Then we have 17 markets, so we also look at market performance as well. So we look at market by market, and then we also look at things like test riding in certain markets as well to see what the impact of that is as well if we're doing events around it. So it's multiple channels, right? A big launch like a kind of big e-bike launch this year, EMTB launch, for example, we were doing a lot of events around that as well. So there's kind of multiple metrics and feedback. We don't do it in one meeting, right? So it's not where we look collectively at all the things.
But in each case, it's departmental, PR,
exactly,
events,
exactly,
digital,
and in each, exactly right. And then we're just looking at the lessons and how we then apply them. Yeah, and I think, as I say, it's not really about short-term shifts. It's much more about, all right, next time, what do we do better? What do we take? What was good that we can apply to another launch, and what maybe do we want to shift? And this is part of that point that I made before about the culture of change and adaptability as well, because we do different launches for different categories, different bikes, because the media are different in some cases, the personalities involved are different. The sort of people, for example, in the old days, everyone would do a press camp, right, for media for every bike. And this was the standard. Everybody does exactly the same thing. Yep. But in different categories, media want different things. Some people want long-term tests. Some people want to do a test from their home. Other people are really happy to fly to Italy and ride some mountains. It's really how do we optimize that? And also the story we want to tell. If we've got an innovation story, sometimes it's better for us to gather people because we can explain the story in a more in a deeper, richer way. than if it's really just about ride sensation, where we want to communicate that. So we're always looking for what the different, what the most successful methods are, and also how do we adapt it according to the bike and the story we want to tell as well.
In terms of team partnerships, this is obviously the type of marketing that not all brands can afford. But you mentioned that Roman, personally, who's still, even though the company was purchased by the majority by a holding company, Roman is still one of the owners of the company, and he handles the partnerships.
That's right. Yeah.
I guess I would like to know what your thoughts are on, or if you can help us understand the impact of professional teams. I mean, I understand that is the pinnacle of the sport, and it puts your brand head and shoulders above everyone, especially if you're winning, right? But can you tell us a little bit more about why that's so important to a brand, and why it's important for Canyon to be in the competitive cycling, and maybe how you measure that as well, because it can't be easy to measure.
No, it's really difficult to measure. And the truth is, it isn't for everybody, right? And it's not for every brand, and I don't think it fits the profile of every brand. And it comes back to the basic point of culture, and performance is fundamental to our culture, right? So before we look at the relative returns of our involvement in pro sports, from a sales perspective, or even from a customer credibility perspective, it first and foremost drives the internal culture, right? Engineers want to perform for athletes. It's very motivating. People really do want to make a great product to help Jan Frodeno or Chloe Dygert or a Mathieu Van der Poel win a race. It's really matters to those teams. They're really driven by that. And that then cascades to the customers.
The product,
right? I think
to the product and then to the customer.
It's really fundamental, and I think that's been we do have metrics. When Mathieu Van der Poel wins Paris-Roubaix, we can see the impact in sales, and there is a direct impact. There really is, and because there's a lot of us bike fans that want to be Mathieu Van der Poel for an afternoon or whoever else, So first and foremost, I think it drives the product and how we develop the product. And then, of course, it has an impact in the credibility of the brand as well. But it's about us, Canyon. That's who we want to be. We're a very performance-focused brand. And so it helps define the product we make as well, and the story we want to tell.
Sure. And so in terms of PR, I know PR is, there's something that you learn this in the business, that PR is extra it's more valuable because of the fact that it's coming from a third party, right? Which inherently has more trust than an ad on Google or an ad on Facebook. So I think PR is always going to be, if we're going to talk about, we talked about the sponsorships. PR is another big pillar of your communication strategy. In terms of PR, what are you seeing in the market? I mean, there has been a contraction in PR, kind of this organic contraction in the number of publications out there, just people kind of migrating to digital. Are you seeing more of a shift towards microbloggers, micro influencers on Instagram and Facebook? Maybe just tell me about what you're seeing in that sense, just to give people an idea of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it is really important to us, and we do value it, and we've always wanted to be part of the industry. When I say the broad we, I think that's Roman as much as has driven that as much as anybody else. But the culture at Canyon, we like being in the bike industry. So it is a little painful to see the transition in media, right? Because the institutions that a lot of us grew up with, in whatever country you're from, are disappearing, are not quite the same. However, again, coming back to the comfort with change, we have to get used to the idea that it's not the same. And
right.
How does that affect us? In very simple terms, the media list maybe looks really different for a launch, right? We're looking at different partners for that our bikes, we have as a technical point, we centralize all of our marketing bikes, for example. So everything comes from Koblenz. We have to ship it around the world, right? It's it's in many ways the most effective, efficient way to do it. But we're connecting with media in every market, and it's really different. The landscape is really different. In countries like France, the media market's collapsed really tragically, but what we're seeing is, sort of individuals stepping up, and a lot more people that are developing their own channels. Of course, we're seeing that in the English-speaking world as well, the shift to more sort of
content creators,
individual media channels, in the US and in the UK, and we want to support all of them, so we make sure obviously that we're providing product at the minimum, because that's great for us too, but in other ways that we can as well. We still commit investment to supporting the media as well, because we want it to exist, But we are also recognising it's shifting and changing, so we're sort of comfortable to sort of try different things and work with different media.
Back to the to be agile, to be ready for change. So that's kind of been an overarching topic that we've talked about. I know there was one thing I wanted to talk to you about for sure was TikTok. It's such an interesting. It's so interesting because we talk about change. As far as I know, the latest statistics, I mean, TikTok is affecting everyone. I mean, look at how Instagram sort of changed their strategy to mimic TikTok with the Reels platform. YouTube added the Shorts platform. I mean, me personally, I love TikTok. I love the way that it's just really short, bite-sized content, and it's interesting, and it is educational and fun, and I don't know, you being in the position that you're in, what are you seeing? Where is this going?
Well, before we get to the specific TikTok, is this point about content and what we make, right? We were in the habit of making let's go back a bit, right? Obviously, a lot of what we're making was static. Hundreds of photographers around came, taking stills, and then this sort of shifted a little bit to video content, and then we were still somewhat to this day, but less and less in the habit of making like launch concept videos. Where you do a bit like advertising, right? You do a 30-second, 1-minute video, right? And these are, I don't want to say completely dead, but they're pretty much dead. They're not effective for us at all.
Wow.
And actually, what you see is
those longer form launch videos. You're saying
you'd have to call them sort of. They're not longer because they're sort of mid-form. What we're finding is a diversion in two directions. One is to very short content, which we'll come back to, and one is to extremely long content, right? So the most successful content for us is 20, 30 minutes long, and going deep, on technology
YouTube. On YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, predominantly YouTube, but we're seeing it actually even on TikTok. We've got longer pieces on TikTok that we've done that have been pretty successful. So I don't want to just focus on YouTube, but you see a kind of move towards that, which has got high levels of engagement, really high watch-through rates. Maybe the overall numbers are lower, but your levels of engagement are really, really high.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And then obviously what you're talking about more is the short content, right? And our head of social, Christian, he is to every team is saying, I need more short content. This is what we need to deliver.
But it's expensive. Right?
Yes, no. I mean, there's some, very low, and this is where you start to take advantage of the assets you're investing in, right? We have so many pro athletes. Doing short stuff with pro athletes is
okay. But can they do it well? Do they do it well?
They do it in a very authentic way, I would say, and authentic is the most important issue. In that, certain things we have to do with high production. That's right. And certainly around launch materials, bike launches, we want to make sure that the quality of the materials
it doesn't.
Really strong,
but I'm not saying it has to be high production. I'm just saying that there are certain sensibilities about it being fast and it being to the point and it being having somewhat of a hook. So it is technical, but it can be technical, but not high quality production. You know what I'm saying?
No, that's right. But we also know the good storytellers and the bad storytellers, right? And that's what we're talking about.
You've got your
we know
team,
which athletes to go to. Yeah, who's going to be really, really strong.
Okay, that's so interesting. No, I'm glad we got to get into this because I'm genuinely curious about how this has happened. So it's, the reckoning is here.
Yeah, it's a change again. It's another shift, and that's
Yep.
what we're managing and dealing with. But it's if you take it as a good challenge, I think then it becomes quite interesting, quite fun to do, And it's disappointing when the things you wanted to perform don't perform. Of course, that's because I look at those things, and as a guy in his 50s now, it's like I liked old. I worked in advertising. I like those old ads, but they don't work. They just don't work. And so,
you have to respect the data, and you have to respect the market.
Yeah, and when you find new ways to be creative, because it doesn't mean creativity is dead. It just means the format's dead.
It changed.
Yeah? So exactly. So I think that's the thing that keeps it exciting.
That really boils it down, because we just keep coming back to change, being ready for change. So success, in your experience, is to be open to change and to be agile and flexible. That feels like what we're talking about, especially in communications, obviously.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's it. Just being realistic about the fact that it will happen. So you have to somehow embrace it.
You do. I mean, the world isn't going to change just because you want it to. It's
No, exactly.
It's going to change how it wants to change.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we're coming up on an hour here, Simon. I know your time's very valuable, and I appreciate you coming on. But I think we got into some fun stuff here. Maybe we can do it again sometime. We can go and dive into some other concepts.
Pleasure.
But this was really fun seeing you were very forthright about everything you're doing, and I think people are going to really appreciate that. And we're going to have a lot of very happy listeners we got to peek inside behind the curtain at Canyon today. So very cool stuff.
Let's see. Huge pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Thanks, man.